very loud. How is everybody doing?
Well, good.
Very good. So there's 80 people who signed up to this, but I said, 9:15 on a Thursday morning. We'll see how much show up. But excited for this discussion. I think we had a brief interaction before. I think there's not been so many corporate venture capital conversations in Davos over the last couple of years. So it's also a bit of an experiment, but great to see some familiar faces. So we can make this maybe a bit more of a discussion. Good morning. Hello. You found us. So what we want to do today, we want to talk about strategic capital and how corporates and corporate venture capital can provide strategic capital when it comes to building more resilience and having a pretty esteemed panel, a lot of experience coming together. I'll briefly introduce the panel. Next to me is Jeppe, who has been working in corporate venture capital for many decades and the name is on the list there, is going to start a new corporate venture capital fund with a German company, Jung Heinrich, but there's a lot of experience from the shipping side, and we'll talk about that. Then Ivo, who is currently running the corporate venture capital group at Swiss Post, but coming in with a lot of experience from the US, working in ventures, working in Silicon Valley, and bringing that experience to the European ecosystem. And then last but not least, Marta, who is in charge of partnerships and corporations at a big consulting and advisory organization based in the Middle East. So looking forward to the conversation with the three of you. Unfortunately, Katharina is delayed due to some traffic problems. So I'll see if she managed to join, then we'll put her in. Otherwise, we'll take more questions from the audience. Maybe a few quick thoughts about the Corporate Venture Capital and Open Innovation Summit, which is the group who is co-hosting this with unDavos, and all of us have been at the summit in Berlin. It is an invite-only summit where the heads of corporate venture capital are meeting to talk about their challenges, exchange, best practice exchange, taking place in the US as well as in Europe at the moment, and the next summit is taking place in Miami in 2 weeks. But with no further ado, maybe we'll start slightly different than we spoke about. Maybe each of you can share what is exciting for you to be working at the intersection of corporate transformation, investments, and innovation. Because I remember when I started my journey 10 years ago in this space, there was a lot of venture capitalists who always tried to explain to me, corporate venture is not the real thing. But I personally believe it's even more strategic and more real than just VC. So let's maybe start with you, Jeppe. Just a short 30 seconds on what excites you and why you're in the corporate venture space.
I started my career in venture capital, so pure venture capitalist by heart and upbringing, being very much kind of brainwashed by the VCs to believe they were the only ones being able to control everything around startups. So when I left that side after a decade, came into mass growth and their CVC, I came with that mindset. It is the VCs that knows everything. Fast forwarding to now, where I'm a full believer in corporate venturing, basically because of the value creation side of things. VCs bring network, they bring money, they bring experience. Corporates do the same, and then we bring even more value creation to the side, right? So for me, the secret is unlocking the value creation source.
Ivo.
Hello. Yeah. Funny enough, similar background. I started VC first as well. Maybe this is part of how to be successful within a CVC, because I always start with the VC background first. However, what I like in CVC is in these times when fundraising is hard to still be able to invest in startups. And also I think something which is amazing is this pool of expertise. So for example, where I barely had expertise in finance when I started to work at the Swiss Stock Exchange. I haven't worked within logistic before I started to invest for Swiss Post, for example. But one of the good things about the ecosystem in Silicon Valley, for example, they have good access to experts. And here in Europe, the VCs lack slightly on that. And as CVC, I have access to 40,000 plus experts in their field. And I think this is also huge assets where I learn a lot.
Mada, how is it about partnerships with startups in yours?
Okay, so I don't do only partnership with startups in this biggest listed Australian company globally, but I also am in the investment committee of the Saudi Angels Investment since years. I started the ecosystem in Dubai 7 years ago with Dubai early stage investment, and 10 years ago I was in Safaricom, which is Vodafone Kenya, that started M-Pesa with the first CVC in Africa. So for me and I will then come to partnership. For me it's interesting. I have a different experience from you guys because I started my first company at 14, and then I was one of the youngest Hollandberger consultant, and then Accenture partners working on Saudi and the other big giga projects that we now hear about it. I started 7 years ago. And then I became one of the youngest CEO in telecom companies outside of Europe, because I would have been too young for Europe. So for me, why I like this, because when I was a founder and I set up and sold companies, I didn't have the money that I have now in CVC and in venture capital to double down my impact. And because when I was a consultant, we were doing due diligence for companies that Invest Corp or the big names we'd acquire. So now I don't just do the due diligence for someone else. I don't just, bootstrap my own companies, but I can really use my experience, which is from operation grounds up, and not just investment for it. So that's why I have I know everyone starts in investment banking or in venture capital, especially in US. So my experience is different. And that's why I really loved it. Now, partnerships, what does it mean, partnership? In the way Worley does it. It means either, strategic partnership or JV, or also acquisitions when we really want to partner and we acquire a part of the companies, and also dismissal. So I love it now because after 2-3 years of dismissal, Worley Pearson is a company grown by acquisitions. Now we can really start looking at the investments in the 3 key areas that for the strategy we set up are important: rare earth minerals in energy, so that's why, and infrastructure, and we do it now in Europe. That when the laws are changing. Secondly, so power in data center. When I was here also in a lot of discussions, everybody talks about AI, everybody talks about data center, which is great. The only problem that we need to solve from the energy and infrastructure perspective, and we do it with investment and startups, is really cooling for data center, power and water. And that's what the companies we've tried to look at in the deal flow are helping us, and I found it exciting.
You're bringing up a fantastic segue into the kind of first question around resilience, right? We talk about resilience, investing into infrastructure, which can help us as companies, but also as regions to be more resilient. So, Jeppe, a question for you. When we talk about investing, and some of the VCs say, startups, we work with corporations, they never kind of like at the scale, or it's very difficult. So can you share a little bit about why things sometimes don't happen so fast when you work with startups and corporations, and why they stale, and what are the points which are very important when you make these decisions in a corporation to get everybody on board?
I think a lot of times it's a matter of getting the right startups in front of the corporate. And to be able to do so, you actually need to do a lot of work around setting up the corporate entity. We also, Ivo and I were talking, right? It's more this, how are the structures built up when you get it right? And I think when you get it right and you have the processes, then you are set up for success. But it doesn't mean that you can actually do these kind of investments, because the risk associated with doing startup investment is significant. Oftentimes when you go into these hardware-related investments, it ends in front of the CFO at one point of time. And then you have to decide, how do you allocate your free liquidity really different being, listed or not listed. So for me, it is the risk associated with it. It is, do you have the right investment committee set up or other setup that can take the decisions? And that is where you're stalling, right? Then you also see oftentimes if there is not a right structure within, for example, vice presidents, how are they incentivized to help these startups? If you don't have a clear way of doing that, then you might fall out and lose investing in these companies.
So Ivo, if you think about your journey, and maybe for the group here, explaining a little bit how do you set up a really successful corporate venture capital group? I know it's a loaded question. Is it more financial? Is it more strategic? But what are the things you think are important from a incentives perspective to make sure that you as a corporate venture group can actually act and really create value for the startup and for the corporation?
I love spontaneous questions. That's one of the biggest challenge for a CVC, because there is not one right answer, because I think it a little bit depends on what's the culture of a corporate. But I think it's always in the intersection of having an more or less independent team or independent decision taking, but with still having ties to the corporation. So you still want to have access to this expert pool, like I mentioned. You still want to have benefit on pushing startup collaboration within a corporation, but you don't want to have top managers of your corporate deciding where to invest. You still have to where this come from the other perspective first. So I think, and here it's really about moving that depending on the culture of a company. So I would say if you have a micromanagement company, then the CVC should be pretty far away, because otherwise you run the risk to actually hire these kind of people from your business, which are used to micromanagement, which just want to do this, and so you end up to do bad investments. So it's always this intersection. For me personally, if you want to do it long-term successfully, the team also has to be incentivized over time and not similarly like the rest of the corporate. And this is also hard to implement.
But I also think here, Ivo, that you have a responsibility as a corporate venture entity, right? You have the responsibility to bring your insights, as strategic insights, up through the whole organization, right? You need to share with your leaders what is going on in the startup ecosystem, because they are not attached to it. They're living a very, very different life. And remember, venture capital is such a small part of the global economy as such, right?
Absolutely. And Marta, from your perspective, obviously, you don't, from a corporate side, you do more partnerships. How do you make decisions around partnerships? Who is involved in the organization?
I think for us, what we did right is to have the right process. So when I came, there was no process. And then, if you don't have the right stakeholders clear on what you want to achieve, clear on why they need to be there and dedicate the time, and also clear on the process and the timelines, things get delayed, especially in my part of the world. So what we did from the beginning is we really kick it off, making sure that there were participation for every single department, from finance to everyone. We really dedicated a lot of time to set this up, to make sure that who needed to be there was there, that they knew our timelines, and that they knew exactly when we were meeting, like the investment committee, and what was needed from them. I know it's stupid, but in my experience, it's the majority of the things that fails, because a corporate is not there, to do venture capital. They're there to make profit, to really ensure that there are no big issues. So, and having been in executive management of corporates, I can totally understand it. So for us, this having the right system in place and process was the key things. The other thing is to really have I think the delegation of authority. Like, as I think my fellow panelists said, we need to understand how the corporate culture is set up. If everybody wants to review everything, then okay, fine, we need to make sure that they have enough time. And if everybody allowed us to make decision, we were just delegating everything, preparing and ready for the sign. The other things that, in my experience, was challenging in the beginning, both in Africa and Safaricom and the other companies, as I think Jeff was saying, is the right deal flow, especially doing energy and deep tech. And the way I turn it around, because a friend suggested, not because I'm super intelligent, is having the right relationship with universities. So go there when the R&D is made. And university needs to prove their case, startups there need money, and we need basically, the right, let's say, list of startups.
When we stay with infrastructure, deep tech, you all mentioned that, and there's a lot of the investments we need to do in Europe, but also in other areas in the world are around energy resilience, right? Where you not only have a software solution, you also have to invest in hardware. And all of you, Marta, I'm not 100% sure with you, but you mentioned also data centers, you all invest or have dealt with infrastructure. Can we start with you, Jeppe? Why do you think corporates actually have an advantage than a typical VC, and becoming more and more important when it comes to building the resilient infrastructure around data, climate tech, deep tech, to really make sure that these technologies are leveraged?
And here I'm gonna, through the podcast that I also do, I had a good chat with Intel Ignite. That inspired me a lot. They work with what they call CAB, so Customer Advisory Board. Simply make sure that you talk to the customers all the time and figure out what it is that they need, right? And I think some of the projects that I've been involved with in the past 24 months has been a lot around resilience and around the electrical grid. So investing in batteries to balance the grid. And I think when you know your customers, if you have access to your customers that have grid access already, why not leverage that? And that again, it's value creation, but it's leveraging all your assets. So understanding your customers, taking that in, and then investing in this in a clever way, right? I think that makes so much sense.
And Ivo, if you think about this kind of like from an internal challenge, what is needed to really get the business behind it to make an investment?
Don't ask them for permission. So no, this is really a kind of setup which I strongly believe your investment decision should not be based on the current strategy of a business unit or the company. This is why I say if you really want to invest long-term into new technologies which will not give a return of investment within the next 3-4 years directly, which might not be interested for the current business, which is not solving a current problem for them, because they're focused on current problems they want to solve, then you should keep that slightly independent, and you should have a budget for that. You should have a separate budget for that and not have to ask your board or CEO about, hey, should we do this investment? Why that? Because speed is important also for early stage investments or any investments, because especially in the good investments round, you have to be quick.
So as we have only a small group here, so maybe you guys want to think about some questions. So I'll have one more question for Marta, but then I will just ask some of the friends who are here in the audience. So Marta, you mentioned process is really important when it comes to building partnerships and whether with other corporations and startups. Do you see more partnerships also between different corporations? And question goes to all of you, where corporations come together and say, okay, we would like to partner with a certain new technology, but we know we have to come together to make it work. Any experience from your side, specifically being in the Middle East, where you have been working on some major projects, including NEOM and others?
So I will give my answer based on the energy sector that I know and the digital one. And the answer is yes. We need, especially to get to the net zero, to get to autonomous operation, which are health and safety, we definitely, as ecosystem, need to come together. Especially, I would say also public and private partnership in the area of the world, which is GCC. So the 6, Gulf oil-rich country. We definitely need to work with OEMs. We need to work with governments. We need to work with research institutes and with corporates to really make sure that we can do something together. That's absolutely what we've been trying to do. For the experience, so limited compared to my colleagues that I have in Europe, I think it's also a good recipe to really, harness the power of corporates and funds and finance.
Maybe I can add there, what I would love to see in Europe is a multi-corporate fund. So getting really rid of this, hey, this is our money, we want to decide, into, hey, we decide what kind of topics are long-term relevant for us, which we see, which are maybe not the full core, or maybe even cannibalizing our core. That will be more interesting. But then partnering up with like other player in a logistics sector, for example, or in an energy sector, or with other corporates, which these topics are also relevant, and then start to do that actually across Europe.
Would you do this with like corporates in a specific sector, or really like broad sector unspecific?
I would love to see it like topic-wise. So if you say it's like, hey, future energy grids, it's like more on a specific topic, and really think a little bit outside of, because, Swiss Post, for example, you could think, okay, logistic, but it's much more. It's also mobility. Mobility is also, it's like, how do you charge your electrified fleet? How do you store that energy? So this is a huge topic.
You do autonomous too, right? I mean, I see some autonomous shuttles in Zurich all the time from you.
Oh, since many years, yeah.
What I think, in just contributing a little bit, I saw a study from an Italian professor on corporate venturing, right, from the Nordic countries, claiming that 42% of all corporate VCs actually like to co-invest with one another. And I think, Ivo, building what you said, right, I think for me, the first 10 years of my life, I was also CFO for a life science fund. There are no challenges in life science with having many corporates on the cap table at the same time. And I think probably because a lot of us go around in the tech ecosystem, they're a little bit scared. The VCs are a little bit scared of seeing us CVCs on their cap table, because they think we will ruin the next financing round. We will try to buy the companies early and so forth. So I think we have an obligation to tell the stories and make sure that we behave also in that venture-like ways, right? Because these energy investments, they're so CapEx heavy, and we need more CVCs in there. Also with all the expertise that we do have, right? We have so much to contribute with to take part of this, heavy CapEx investment across, the globe.
So looking into the audience, any questions? Any thoughts? I'll start with you. Maybe you can just briefly say your name. Say your name and then your question.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Burrows. I'm from Compass VC. We're a Danish early-stage venture fund. I have a question probably for you, but most specifically to you, please. Yeah. I'm going to try asking this question without naming any names.
Come on.
We are here nearly in a small group, Chattenhouse rules.
I have had conversations with our portfolio companies who are raising and are concerned about working with a CVC, because even if they have a really successful pilot with them, if they can't go forward with them because of all sorts of reasons and challenges that all sorts of companies face with working with corporates in general, even if they have a CVC, even if they have a venture arm, when they next raise, as you were saying earlier about like the relationship with them, if they next raise and that company that's related to that is the CVC isn't listed as a client, that is a big red flag for them.
That's not an issue for us. You don't need to have Swiss Post as a client or have to win them as a client in the future. Of course, it's a nice story, and honestly, we like to invest first, and then you win and get more revenue, so it's a win-win for us. But for us, this is not the case.
I'm thinking if they are wanting to speak to other funds in the future, and they've had investment from Swiss
other corporates or other corporate, okay.
Or anything in the future, the next raise, and they've had an investment from Swiss Post, let's say, in the past, but Swiss Post is not listed as a client.
That's totally fine. I never heard that this is an issue. Really? I think more what most VCs, independent VCs, mean that we will put in strategic terms. And this we don't. This is also something which I think we as CVCs have to outline there. There are some which do it more strategically. It's like really having this term. We don't. We act there in a market like an independent VC.
But I think also, now I come from the country where your LP comes from, right? And I think what I learned from my time at Maersk is I was probably naive in the first couple of years with how could I move Maersk to work with these startups. Did a quite large IoT investment back then. Maersk, we invested, we also became a customer, but it took roughly 36 months before it was a really great collaboration. I think when you do POCs with corporates, make sure to frame it, right? What is it that you want to get out of it? I'm also one of the believers that I want a little bit more mature startup before I start collaborating, because I don't think it's in the interest of anybody, either the startup or the corporate, right? Because if the startup is immature, everybody wastes its time. But if you get the POC right, the benefit of the startup is the whale logo on the cap table or as a POC participant, right? And I think that is immense value for a startup.
Positively, yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
I had a question from, yeah, please. But please say also the name or company. Thank you.
I'm a corporate venture capitalist from DAS as well. When I was a CVC, my biggest issue was continuity, the institutional knowledge, because corporations, although they claim that they're independent teams, they do not most of the time. And that institutional knowledge is usually lost when the CEO changes, when the team changes. In your experience, is there a way to deal with that problem? Because that problem will exist, corporates will change leaderships. CVC will popular one CEO and not so popular with the other one. In your experience, have you seen any model that actually works for a CVC longevity despite that leadership change?
I can go. According to Professor Ilya Strebulev of Stanford, the average lifetime of a CVC is 3.7 years. We know two things in corporate life: people and strategy change. I think piggybacking a little bit on what Ivo says, it's culture. I think that decides how you should do it. For me, I mentioned it a little bit before, you need, as a corporate venture entity, to feed your corporate with knowledge to make sure that you bring value. Because when you follow kind of the life cycle of it in VC, right, it is a hockey stick. In year 3, right, you're probably below 1x. And that means that your CFO will most likely close you down for financial measures. Then the next valley inflection is year 6, where you then get closed down for lack of strategic value. If you survive year 9, you have a chance of surviving, but closing the loop with Ilya Strebulev, if you survive 3 CEOs, you have a successful CVC.
So let me follow up on that. So I'm very familiar with his research as well. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. There are very successful CVCs that's been around 3 decades. Bosch is a good example. How do they make that happen? That most cannot. I'm asking for that insight. If you can share.
So I think when you see the nature of CVCs, when corporates start, you see most of them start internally investing, so that's really close to the group. And the really successful ones, they're spinning out. This you've seen with Google Ventures and the big names.
Spinning off is the secret.
Independence.
Spinning off,
Yeah.
having an independent setup, sometimes even renaming SAP Ventures to Sapphire, slightly, but still having this tie to it. With that, what's the benefit? That you have more this kind of fund life cycle, which would still need, after 3-4 years, you would still have to go back to your big LP and ask for, hey, we actually want to have the next fund ready to actually see that. But with that, I think, and team is one of the most important things to see in CVCs actually, because it's also about the investment culture. So, and to have this kind of senior personnel in your team and keep them over longer time, longer than 3-4 years, this is really important to have this incentivation.
Incentives, yeah. So,
Actually, my experience is, as the fellow panelist saying, independence and then strategic mandate. Because there are some CVC that I've seen, especially in emerging markets, that are small, So then it's more difficult to do this. And secondly, some have a mandate to feed the company with potential products and, revenue stream for the futures. Other have a different strategic intent, and those are the ones that can really spin out and stay for decades.
And then I think boldness, right? I think now the name came up here, and I'm actually proud of joining Jung Heinrich, but you cannot share it with anybody. Because the reason why I joined Jung Heinrich, it's because they do the 3 pillars of corporate venturing. They do building, they do investing, they do clienting, and then we also do fund of fund, right? So having the full power and really go deep makes me immense proud of joining the Jung Heinrich team. I'm later today also talking to Alex from Standard Chartered Ventures. He wrote a book about the topic because you don't know where you will be successful in those pillars, right? So if you just go in and take one vertical, the likelihood of you failing is actually a bit higher if you go into all 3.
Thomas, I want to take a last question from you.
A quick one. It's more point. Tobias and I, we co-created 3M Ventures out of Munich, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Silicon Valley like 15 years ago. And my observation is the discussion is still very much the same compared to what we were discussing 15 years ago. Of course, independence, as you just mentioned, like Google Ventures, TV, spinning it out, or even renaming SAP Ventures to Sapphire and pushing it a bit out, I think is a very good idea, because in the end, independence is everything if you want to sustain. On the other side, and this is something that we kind of learned early on, and it's now manifesting more and more, collaborating with systemic VCs, like Andreessen Horowitz or General Catalyst. I think this could be a very good perspective for corporate venture capital, because you can add a certain like corporate and product edge or an intelligence edge to such investments. If you look at Andreessen's initiative in terms of reindustrializing America, called American Dynamism, I think this is where you can fold a good number of good ideas from corporate venturing and the related companies like Jung Heinrich into it.
Yeah. And they also have done like a partnership with a couple of pharma companies, where specifically pharma companies invested, and Horowitz is actually running the deal flow. Before I go back to you, I have one question in the back. I'd want your question, please.
Yes, my question was more actually along.
And please also say your name and.
Oh, yes. Hi, my name is James Mister. I'm based between San Francisco and Munich. I've been the tech diplomat for the state of Bavaria, Germany's largest and wealthiest state in Silicon Valley for over a decade. So I've worked with some of the largest CVCs between Silicon Valley and Munich, helped expand companies like OpenAI and Joby Aviation to Bavaria, with Rivian, et cetera, et cetera. What I wanted to ask was more how you're using your corporate structure. I mean, from Next 47 to Sapphire Ventures, blah, blah, blah. We've worked with all these big CVCs between Munich and Silicon Valley over the last decade. How are you using your corporate infrastructure, the global infrastructure, to help make these companies, as they're growing, more resilient to the headwinds coming? Because geopolitics is very important. I know that's the next panel that I'm on, but what are you guys doing as CVCs? We focused a lot on the endogenous factors. He's mentioned General Catalyst. I was at the event with EMEA, saw friends who are founders from Stanford. Sorry, I'm Princeton and TU Munich, but Stanford founders, it's a big engine. Let's focus on the exogenous factors just for a second to see what you guys are doing to help them with the headwinds that come from outside of that ecosystem. But that's my question. How are you guys helping them be more resilient or robust against the headwinds that could come? We see what's coming with supply chains, with Trump, etc.
I guess for me, my role is global. So we take from Silicon Valley, we take especially mining. There is a very good accelerator in Canada, and then we bring them to Australia, we bring them to Saudi. So I think we are not local. Our key strategies and the companies we accept are companies that can come from one country and brought to the others. And that's exactly my role and my job, and it's been my life experience. So I guess we try to make sure that we embed them in the local and different teams. So, I mean, for example, we have now, since May last year, Worley had had a major transformation. Plus, as I said, I'm not on the EPC side, I'm in engineering consulting. We have 2 regions. I work directly for the CEO of the consulting, which makes everything easy for me. And then I make sure that, the startup that is doing XYZ, I connect them with our colleagues in APAC, I connect them with our colleagues in EMEA, and I connect them with our colleagues in the Americas. And I think for me, it was like having personal relationship and traveling to the different regions that help sponsor the startup we support. But also, it's not just in the corporate, also what we did in Kenya was exactly the same. It's Captain Sound to the strength and the influence of the head of the CVDC and your sponsor in the company.
Maybe one example of my past working for a company called Vontier, who owns a lot of the infrastructure on gas stations. So when we implemented or worked with startups and invested in them, we opened the whole corporate ecosystem for them. So if they wanted to enter, work in the US or European market or in Asia, we would facilitate that, and we had people in these regions who were essentially our innovation counterparts to make sure that they get access to really leverage the global infrastructure. So I think we're running on time here. I want to do one last fire round for each of you, and start with you, Marta, really like 15, 20 seconds. So what would you like to see corporates do more in the next 12 months to invest in more resilience around topics like energy, data centers, and so on and so forth?
Quicker decision making.
That was fast. Ivo, you had no time to think.
Perfect, thanks. We have to distribute more capital, especially in Europe, faster and taking more risk, and also on stuff which might not bring return the next 2 to 3 years.
Jeppe?
Putting the money to play, right? Embrace the risk, and if I can play the little more, especially, I'll take it my own country, right? Those politicians that wants to basically make a better world, start doing it, right? Let us do our job, remove all the structures and walls they're putting up for us to implement what we need to implement.
Well, if I summarize, I think we look for more collaboration, more risk-taking, and take more responsibility to build the future we all want to live in. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks to unDavos for having the time for the panel. Enjoy your afternoons, mornings, and see you later.